Okay, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. As mentioned, yes, my name is Shane Trewartha, and welcome to my talk this afternoon. That's it right there on the screen. The name of the talk, Data is Arbitrary. Do whatever you want with it. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Like, what is the talk actually about? Well, in some ways, it's kind of a spiritual successor to the talk that I gave here at Technically Games last year. But it's about totally different subject matter. So don't worry if you didn't see last year's talk or whatever, although it is there on YouTube if you want to go have a look at it. It's not prerequisite to understanding what this talk is about or anything like that. But if you do find this talk interesting, I would encourage you to check it out. All right, anyways, so what are we talking about here today? What are video games made out of? I mean, like, what even is a video game, really? Although a complete answer to that question is probably best left as a topic for a whole other talk, or will never make it to today's intended conclusion. So sticking for now with just thinking about what games are made out of, like, at the end of the day, you could fairly say that games are made out of a mutual agreement on the representation of ideas. All right, what the hell do I mean by that? Let's take chess, for example. You have the pieces, the board, the rules. What are these things? On their own, they're kind of nothing. They become something when all parties involved agree upon some shared understanding of what these abstractions represent and how they interact. This is quite tangible and easy to get your head around with a simple physical example like a chess set. However, it's still all quite arbitrary. It's arbitrary that the board is divided into black and white squares and that the player controlling the white pieces makes the first move. So arbitrary, in fact, that not all chess sets are even black and white. It's not uncommon for a chess set to be divided into red and white, for example, rather than black and white. As a side note, this particular fact seems to result in a perpetual source of confusion to those not terribly familiar with the original source material, that the Red Queen and the Queen of Hearts from Alice in Wonderland are in fact the same character. They are not. They are different characters. Anyway, this talk isn't about chess or Alice in Wonderland, so let's move on. Video games are no different. They're made up of a bunch of arbitrary, abstract building blocks that only represent anything meaningful when everyone involved, from the developers to the players, kind of agree upon what those abstractions represent. There's an extra wrinkle or two or more, though, in this situation. As any video game, as opposed to, say, something physical like chess, is in turn built on some sort of computer system involving all sorts of additional layers of abstraction. Hardware, operating system, drivers, software, etc. So it's not quite as simple as the chess example, but it's the same basic idea. You've got abstract building blocks that only mean anything with some sort of shared consensus of that meaning. But, and this is a big but, the butt of the whole talk, the butt of the matter is that shared consensus of understanding can actually be anything you want it to be. Why not? Okay, what the hell am I talking about here? Let's come at this from the other direction for a minute. We definitely live in a world where enough game development has been done by enough people for enough years for certain things to be, let's say, assumed. It's definitely something I'm starkly confronted with as an educator of future developers, and having worked in games education on and off for over a decade at this point, I've definitely noticed it's pretty common, and dare I say increasingly so, for students to not really question things and just sort of want to follow well-trodden paths, patterns, templates, off-the-shelf solutions. If this talk has any goal at all, it's to hopefully encourage you to broaden your horizons a bit, expand your mind a little, get you to look at things from different angles. Is it a candlestick or two faces? Is it a duck or a rabbit? maybe both. Now, don't get me wrong, existing pipelines have their place and exist for a reason, of course, especially if you work in a studio, and this gets truer and truer as team size and number of moving parts increase. Sometimes you just got to do what you got to do. You can't be constantly reinventing the wheel. But presumably some of you are here either as hobbyists or you have interest in making games that aren't purely just the purview of some larger entity than yourself. Maybe sometimes you really do want to bake an apple pie, video game from scratch. Or not even necessarily from scratch. Like maybe you're still using an engine like Unity or Unreal or whatever to do all the heavy lifting, but you want to be creative, not just with your art or gameplay, but how your game works and what exactly the nature of those abstract building blocks actually is. It's honestly something I wish we saw more of in video games. Like, lately especially, video games seem to have become so aggressively commodified, and it's almost like people have forgotten that there's even a creative craft at the heart of what we do. And like any craft, sometimes it's fun to do something just for its own sake, just because you can, just for the love of it, or for no easy to articulate reason at all. Now, this is the kind of topic that, if left unchecked, I could probably spin out to a 13-hour talk, but time today is far more limited than that. So I've kind of had to pick my battles a bit, and this is going to be a very whirlwind tour of some, hopefully, thought-provoking ideas that hopefully get your brain juices excited enough that maybe you rush out of here and try something rad that you've never tried before. Really, the takeaway from this talk is not so different from, you got your chocolate in my peanut butter. Except instead of chocolate and peanut butter, it's like, I don't know, pixels or something. All right, so let's start by talking about something tangible. About 8 years ago, I worked on a game called Where's My Water? Some of you may have played it. I did a ton of level design for it. It was a pretty fun game to work on. This level that's on screen right now was one of my favorites that I made for it. It's the last level in the whole game, so grats if you've seen it before, I guess. One of the things that I found most interesting about making levels for this game was the level data itself, the level creation process. That's what I love about all level design, but working on this game presented me with stuff I hadn't seen before. Levels were made up of, each level was made up of two files, a PNG and an XML file. The XML file was used to define, all the entities, their positions, other info about them, things like the spouts and the sliders. There was some ability to place them in engine, like we had an iPad and you would sort of drop them and rotate them with pinch controls and stuff. But after the initial placement, you kind of had to crack open the XML in Notepad and just type in the settings, the flow rate and fluid type of the spouts, how many particles there were in each balloon, stuff like that. So besides that, we had the PNG, which you might be thinking is just an image of the level itself, but it wasn't. It was actually kind of more like a tile map than anything, where a single pixel on the image would be set to a specific color value, and each pixel represented a kind of a blob of stuff in game, either dirt or stone or whatever, anything that wasn't an entity or a particle. So hopefully you can see my mouse as I wiggle it around on screen, but see this little notch in the head of the guitar here, this little 45-degree angle bit. The width of that is 1 pixel on the PNG. The game then, takes the PNG data that you give it, and it does all this fancy line rendering and texture overlay stuff to make your little image be the end result that you see in game. there isn't an exact correspondence between the pixels that you place in the PNG and what appears in game. In fact, sometimes like lines would render on different angles depending on what other material they were adjacent to, or the thickness of that material, or a bunch of other stuff. So you kind of had to just make a tweak, see what it looked like in game. Getting the exact shape of this guitar was actually quite difficult, and hopefully you've at least sort of had a bit of a thought already that, like, if this is a tile map essentially, and what you're looking at there actually has some pretty smooth curves in it, then there's going to be a lot of sort of like interpretation by the game to turn those blocky outlines into something round like that. Anyway, so back to the point at hand. The important thing, though, when working on levels for this game, was to think of it as a big grid of abstract data. Like, you wanted this as the end result, but you were working with the individual building blocks, right? This, of course, is not uncommon. In fact, it's so not uncommon. There are tools out there that act as middleware for just this sort of creation, right? This here is a program called Tiled. If you haven't used it before, it's pretty rad. I would definitely recommend it. What you see on screen right now, this is a screenshot, so I can't interact with that. This is the actual level here. So this maybe isn't the best example of what Tiled can do, but it's deliberately really, really abstract because, this is the kind of software that, might be used to, make a little JRPG kind of thing or whatever. You might be used to seeing dirt and grass and trees and stuff like that. But really all it's doing is you give it some image, and here I've just given it a really abstract painting of some colors, and it divides that up into tiles, and you can select those and you can sort of paint them around. Cool. But what's actually going on here, let's close that down and have a look at Notepad. What's going on is it's just saving a big grid of numbers, right? It's XML. You can see there's a bunch of other fluff up the top and bottom, but the bulk of it is just a big grid of numbers, right? You know what else is a big grid of numbers? Textures. Now, I'm not saying that you should use tile to make your textures, but I'm not saying it either. What I probably am saying, though, is that there's no reason that you couldn't use this grid of data for all sorts of things. Yes, there is the obvious use of, like, what it's probably meant for, the kind of little games with your grass and dirt and trees and all that kind of thing, Pokemon, Stardew Valley. That's the kind of thing you would definitely expect to see made with a tool like this. But, as I said, it does just output a big grid of numbers, which you can do whatever you want with just a little bit of extra processing. It's not hard to imagine that you could turn something like this into, say, a mini-map texture for your world or whatever, in which case you would be using it as a texture. Or, and hear me out here, it wouldn't be hard to use something like this to define loot tables either. Now, imagine your tile set, this thing here. Imagine instead of your dirt and grass and whatever, it was all the swords and shields and other knickknacks that you have in your game. And to balance the loot drop of your game, all you do is just paint in, how many you want of each. Let's have a few more of these swords, maybe an extra boot or two here. Yeah, that looks like a pretty good ratio. And then you've got like a visual way of balancing that kind of stuff. I don't know, that sounds pretty damn handy to me. All right, if you want to grab it and check it out for yourself, I definitely recommend it. It's just on itch. Go support the creator or whatever. It's pretty fun to play around with. All right, so this next example I'm going to try and keep brief, partly so I don't run out of time, which I think is probably inevitable, to be honest, and partly because I wasn't actually quite able to 100% find a completely definitive answer to how this works. So I don't want to fuel the old misinformation machine too much. But I do want to talk about the Spore creature creator for a minute. Just while we're on the topic of like stuff you can do with images or grids of numbers. Because this did an amazing thing with its save files. Your creature that you made, when you saved it out, the save file was just a PNG. That's all it was, just a little picture of what your little creature looked like in game. That's it. No other extra files, no XML or whatever. No just, arbitrary lump of binary data. Well, I mean, other than that's kind of what a PNG is. The PNG was all you needed to give someone for them to load it into your game. And that's great because, images are incredibly shareable, right? Perfect for the internet. And Max has made use of this. They had this online creature sharing thing where you can just upload a PNG and you can just right-click, save as, and then chuck the image in your folder and it's good to go. It's in your game. That's an amazing save system. I don't know why more games don't do stuff like that. Now, back in the day, 13-ish years ago when this came out, I was sure I remembered reading a thing written by one of the devs about exactly how this worked. However, while researching this talk, I was reminded of just how easy it was 13 years ago for anyone to get on the internet and claim their opinion as fact. Oh, wait, that hasn't changed at all. But I was also reminded that there was a ton of speculation over how this was actually done, and basically just a whole lot of people guessing without it being actually based on anything. So it does come down to, there's two possibilities of how this might work, and I'll describe both. Well, not in a lot of detail. Like I said, we don't have a lot of time here. But I couldn't definitively track down an official answer as to which of these two it actually is. So it's either done with what's called steganography, which some of you may or may not have heard of before. That's basically the idea of hiding one image in another. And if that's the way it was done, then they would be using the least significant bit for each pixel, the thing that's going to make it least noticeable if that bit changes visually, I mean. And that bit would be used to encode all the bone data and all the other crap that the game needs in order to, rebuild the creature in game. Or it's done using a feature of the PNG file format where you can basically just define arbitrary blocks of data in a PNG that have nothing to do with the pixel data. A PNG can contain anything you want it to. You just have to basically set it up that way, write to it whatever you want. Now, I'm pretty sure the second thing is the way that Spore does their save files. But like I said, could be either. Doesn't really matter, to be honest. Both are kind of cool. And regardless of which of the two methods it's actually using, the real takeaway here is that the save game data is just an image file, and that's pretty damn rad. So, all right, what if we want to use an image for something other than save data? Those of you who were at my talk last year may recall me showing something similar to what you see on screen right now. And at the time, for whatever reason, although I was on a different computer last year, so maybe that was the reason, I wasn't really able to play audio over the stream. This year, though, that seems to be back on the cards. So what we're looking at here on this slide is on the left here we have, let's call this a texture. It's an image. And on the right here, we see that image represented as an audio wave. However, those of you who know anything about image or audio data formats know that there isn't just one way of storing pixel data, and there isn't just one way of storing audio data either. Pardon me. So this wave on the right isn't the way this image would sound. It is a way this image would sound if loaded up as audio data. In this specific case, this image is a TIFF, and this is it loaded into a piece of software that lets you pick the format, basically, of just an arbitrary lump of data. And in this case, it is PCM 5 kilohertz 8-bit mono. I tried a whole bunch of different formats, and anything higher frequency than that was extremely unpleasant to listen to. So if anyone's curious, I'll hit play on this. I have it in an audio editor here, and you may notice this looks slightly different because I've turned the volume way down. But if you don't want to hear this, take your headphones off for a second. If anyone's curious, this is what that magenta image sounded like. I've tried loading up a whole bunch of different stuff over the years as audio data to see what it sounds like, and I did mention this in last year's talk, but it is kind of worth mentioning again because I find it very curious. For whatever reason, DLLs sound really good. They've got like a rhythm to them. They've got like a metronome almost. I don't know what that's about. I'm determined to get to the bottom of that one day. All right, what was I up to here? So now after you've just listened to that, this next slide comes with a potential photosensitivity warning. So if that applies to any of you, I'll give you a moment to I'll let you know once I've moved on from the next slide, but it won't be on screen for long. The reason for the next thing I'm about to show you is that this is kind of coming at this whole situation from the opposite direction. This GIF is from a film clip that I worked on a few years ago for a music track where and I'm switching to the slide now, by the way, where the textures, UVs, and other things that make up the visuals here right now, these were generated from the audio of the music track itself. So, while you're watching the clip, you can't necessarily see how the two are related other than, timing synchronization. But it's just a nice little extra thing that I wanted to try where, instead of having to decide what colors to use for this abstract kaleidoscope, the colors were just generated from the audio. Okay, I've moved on from that now in case anyone has decided that they didn't want to watch that GIF. All right, so this next screenshot you'll probably recognize as Unity. How are we going for time? Yeah, I can probably squeeze in a quick Unity demo here. So far, we've sort of been swapping around image data and audio data, all just numbers, right? You know what else is all just numbers? Meshes. No reason you couldn't use audio data to generate some sort of mesh. In this demo here, it's not quite what I'm doing. I'm not going so far as to generate vertex data and then stitching them together into a big strip of triangles or anything like that. What you're seeing on the screen here is a much more blunt force example than that. I'm literally just instantiating a primitive sphere at the location of every single audio sample. So it's not terribly performant. But let's just open up Unity for a second. And have a bit of a closer look at what's going on there. If I hit play, we'll see, like, okay, we've got a whole bunch of spheres here. Yep, they're definitely spheres, and there's definitely a lot of them. So what's happening here is we're once again using audio data for something other than audio. We're using it to generate something that we probably wouldn't have come up with if we were making this ourselves by hand. But with things like this, you don't have to just, throw your hands up in the air and go, well, hope for the best, I guess. You can still sensibly build in controls for yourself, right? Even just for this extremely rudimentary example here, we've just got some controls where it's like, maybe you don't want to generate a sphere on every sample. So we'll generate, say, 100 spheres, and instead of doing it on every single sample, we'll do it on every 10th sample or something like that. Hit play, and then what do we get? We get something that is extremely crunched up, because by cutting out 9 out of 10 samples, we get them extremely packed together. So making the sample count lower was actually, not what we want to do by making the step higher. We'd want to put that, in the other direction. We'll grab a big slice of the audio data and skip 9 out of every 10, see what it looks like. And whenever you're ready, I probably put too many zeros on the end of that. That's I should probably stop that before my whole computer crashes and that's the end of the talk. Anyway, I won't fiddle around with this forever. You get the idea. You can do cool stuff by interpreting numbers how they weren't intended to be interpreted. Okay, so you might be looking at my hacky examples so far and going, right, but can you do anything good with this stuff, with these ideas? And the answer, of course, is, there's a world of difference between proof of concept and final product. I could go and slap a single brush stroke on a canvas and go, yep, paint works. But that one brush stroke alone isn't a Rembrandt. That doesn't mean the paint's busted. So here on this slide, and it's totally fine to listen to this, by the way, this isn't going to blow your ears out. This here is an example of someone who really knows what they're doing, who has in fact made an entire album that, if played through an oscilloscope, will accompany the music with matching visuals. So I'm just going to play a brief clip here for you so you get an idea of what that even means. But I do recommend checking out the entire album in your own time. All right, we'll leave it there. So, initially it kind of like was what you might expect from an oscilloscope, just a lot of sine wave sort of looking stuff. But then it started rendering the earth and teapots, and you can see in the thumbnails down there, there's a bicycle in one of those. That's literally a visualization of the audio waveform that you were listening to right there. It's astonishing. If you Google that name at the bottom, there is the name of the dude who this work is from. If you Google that, you'll find the whole album. Okay, so that was pretty cool. But while we're still in the realm of music coming from unusual data sources, allow me to introduce you to... Oops, didn't mean to click on that. I meant to go to the next slide. Allow me to introduce you to Barcoder. They play music with barcode patterns. I'll let the video speak for itself on this one. And in this second one, the thumbnail's probably giving away what's about to happen. I'm not going to play the whole thing. It's a very long video. I'll skip to a particular bit of it. Oh, this one. So, you know, because barcodes are just encoded data, right? The width of the bars, not too dissimilar to how CDs work, right? It's, you know, it's in the same ballpark anyway. So instead of using that to, you know, look up some item reference number in a supermarket or whatever, they're just converting it to audio data, and it sounds super cool. All right, so hopefully you can see that these sorts of ideas absolutely can be turned into amazing art. But, you know, these sorts of ideas have to start somewhere, right? Incidentally, while I was putting this talk together, shout out to Michael Callis, who reminded me of the existence of scanners, which these were a fleeting Digimon-style product that had their content defined by scanning just regular everyday barcodes in supermarkets and stuff. I never actually saw one of these in real life, but I imagine you must have looked pretty sus using one, like just scanning beans or whatever to get your Digimon. I don't know. Not like these days with QR codes. QR codes are everywhere these days. It's very common to see someone just scanning stuff. It's funny, not that long ago, QR codes were a bit of a go-nowhere gimmick as far as most people were concerned. I kind of always had a bit of faith in them as an interesting idea, but they hadn't really broken out as useful yet. Turns out, though, the pandemic, I guess, was kind of the killer app for QR codes, because now they're super useful and everywhere. People have always kind of used them to try and do interesting stuff, though. You know, QR code scavenger hunts are definitely a thing. And, you know, that's kind of cool. But, again, this is kind of just the tip of the iceberg, right? Especially before everyone was scanning 50 QR codes a day. Not everyone was really into, like, you know, something like this, right? All right, so let's maybe start going down this train of thought and see where it takes us. Imagine a game that you play out and about, sitting at a pub or whatever. Look at this idiot talking on the phone instead of playing games on it. Or, I don't know, you're on a park bench or whatever, just lazily minding your afternoon. And in order to play this hypothetical game that we're about to spitball, you have to connect to the server that the game is run from via some wireless hotspot or whatever, some public Wi-Fi. And the key detail here is that whatever the game actually is, that kind of doesn't matter for this thought experiment. The mechanical details are unimportant for now. The world generation of that game would use as a seed the MAC address of the device that you're connected to. Imagine the new types of gameplay dynamic this would facilitate. You see on, you know, Minecraft speedruns and stuff like that, they have categories that specify the seed. So, best time on this seed, right? In this hypothetical game we're talking about here, though, where the seed is the MAC address of whatever wireless device that you're connected to, and so it is tied to that physical location. That then would lead to a situation where you're competing for a high score at a location. You'd end up getting spots that were renowned for being good or bad. Sure, you got 1 million points, but can you get 1 million points at the Starbucks on Swanston Street? Now, I know I can't go 10 minutes without making a comparison to skating, but in this particular instance, it's pretty damn apt. It would be basically the equivalent of making your mark on a famous spot, right? By doing a trick that no one else had done there before, at that location anyway, right? The combination of thing and place would be the gameplay dynamic. We can take this same idea in a different direction, maybe. This whole talk has been about, different and unexpected and unconventional ways to use data. So what other data do we have at our disposal when we're out and about? Well, our phones all have cameras in them. What if instead of simply being at location X and doing whatever the game asks of you, you have to be at location X, and part of the gameplay is actually finding the best thing to point your camera at to do what the game requires of you. Okay, what do I mean by that? So let's imagine it's some Donkey Kong style gameplay, and you have to, use your phone's camera to point it at some brickwork or whatever, and it will generate the platforms out of the grout of the brickwork. And then your goal is to find just the right conditions to set up the best possible run. Pardon me. So, the game would process the image and turn that into the play space of the game. Again, this then comes back to the combination of thing and place. Except this time, part of the skill comes from finding the best spot within the spot, so to speak. And this is, just one example. It could be anything. It doesn't have to be Donkey Kong. You'd need to come up with some sort of actual compelling gameplay mechanic that dovetailed neatly with this idea. And yes, I'm aware that at first blush, this does sort of sound like you could very easily cheese it by having the perfect level just drawn on a piece of paper that you carry around with you and just point your camera at. Like I said, this is a thought experiment, and solving such a problem would, be one of the design challenges of such a game. AR stuff has ways of, determining depth and, all that kind of stuff. So you could come up with some way to avoid cheesing it. You wouldn't just phone it in, because then the whole thing would be pointless. Like I said, this is just a thought experiment at this stage. We're not solving all the problems here. While we're in the realms of thought experiment, though, and this is pretty much the thing that initially inspired this whole talk. Again, this isn't really any further along than the previous thought experiment. I wish I had like a whole game I could show you right now. That would be awesome, but I don't. It is slightly further along, but not much. Just enough to sort of proof of concept it, right? I can at least open Unity for this one anyway. Anyway, something I've had kicking around in my head for like 20 years at this point, since I was at uni, and I'm kind of genuinely surprised that I've never seen anyone do something along these lines. Now, I'm not saying no one has, I'm just saying I've never seen it. Maybe someone's done it, I don't know. But imagine a game, and we've kind of already discussed from many different directions so far that the data that defines the content of a game can come from pretty much anywhere. And it doesn't have to mean or be interpreted as what it was originally intended to mean. Now imagine a game where instead of, say, the XML the tile spits out or whatever, all nice and carefully curated. Imagine that the source of data for your level was an HTML page pulled straight from the internet. Every single day, HTML is downloaded and then rendered into something that makes sense to us via our browsers, Chrome, whatever. But what if it was rendered as something completely different? What if instead of a table on a website, a table tag represented a sphere in 3D space? Where's the sphere? What does it look like? Well, there's plenty of other bytes lying around that you can use to define that info. Just grab the next 3 characters, convert them into numbers, and bam, XYZ. There's your coordinates. You could then use the next character to define its radius, whatever. It's up to you. Make it up. Pardon me. Now, this would by no means reliably result in something that looked anything even remotely like a real-world space. And that's entirely not the point. It would be abstract as all get out. And at best, you'd maybe be looking at something that vaguely resembled res, maybe. But you could definitely imagine that with enough experimentation, like just to spitball, maybe the letter A represents a flower. And the location of every letter A in the string of text that is the big slab of HTML that you've downloaded. Each one of those A's, its position in the string represents its location along a path. Or whatever. I mean, that's just one hypothetical. This would involve an awful lot of experimentation. But you could imagine having a pretty complex and arbitrary interpretation of the data that resulted in something that would be fun and interesting to explore. Just like it's fun to explore in Minecraft. You never know exactly what you're going to come across. It's going to be trees and desert and caves and whatnot. Like, the stuff that's in the game. But the unique instances and combinations of those things is what you're there for, what you're exploring for. You'd have the same sense of exploration, except, and here's the kicker, HTML pages have in them hyperlinks to other HTML pages. So imagine if in our hypothetical scenario here, where the arbitrarily reinterpreted HTML, if any time we see the characters, href equals, we create a door floating in space. And if you use that door, click on it, whatever, I don't know, whatever the character controller is up to you. You interact with that door in some way and it takes you to a new level, a new space, generated under the same rules, except the source of the data for that level of the new space that you're entering, the source of that is the HTML that is linked to from the previous anchor tag that you just, got the URL from. So now, prior to giving this talk, I had very ambitiously hoped to be able to put together an entire demo of this concept in time ready for this talk. However, this is an exceptionally busy time of year. So sadly, I don't have for you some magical res-style fly-through of the entire internet yet. Maybe one day. I would love to be able to show you something like that. But what I do have for you is proof of concept. There's a freely available DLL you can get very easily for Unity that will download HTML from the internet for you. And then it's basically just, a big string at that point. Here's the link to it if you want to check it out for yourself. Freely available. Just download it, chuck it in Unity. And it was honestly not very much effort at all to just fire that up and then have some HTML data on hand to do something with. It was the actual doing something with it that, we don't really have that happening just yet. But, if we jump over to Unity, we can see here, hang on, where's Unity gone? There we go. Now, it's not often that you have the console preferenced over the game window here. But if we hit play here, what's actually just sort of happening in the background, if Did that refresh? I'm gonna refresh that because I'm not convinced that refreshed. All right, so let's hit play again. And what we're actually seeing in the console here is some HTML tags filtered out of the front page of Reddit as it appears right now. So, stuff that you wouldn't be too surprised to see from HTML, head, body, whatever. Like I said, I'm not doing anything with any of this stuff just yet, but it's proof of concept. It's, these days, extremely simple because, standing on the shoulders of giants and all that. Things like Unity exist. Things like the people who've written this DLL exist. You can just whack that in there, have a big slab of text, do whatever you want with it. Don't make your levels in tiled. Just grab them straight from the internet. And then see what happens, I guess. But again, like with the hypothetical, MAC address game and Donkey Kong game and all that kind of stuff, that technical quirk is really just the sort of like the kernel of the idea. You'd still have to wrap a compelling game around it. The gimmick itself isn't enough. You'd have to do something good with it and not just waste the idea. All right, so that's pretty much it. How are we going for time? I hope you've all had your mind expanded at least a little bit today, and now maybe have some ideas for stuff you might want to go and try yourself. As for me, now that I've actually pulled the pin on this HTML res style game, it's something I'm definitely going to explore further in the future. If that's something you'd like to see me do and want to keep tabs on if I actually do anything with the idea or not, feel free to follow me on Twitter. Or, and this is where I now kind of do a bit of shameless plugging, but don't worry, I got the okay from the organizers first. So next year, in 2022, I'm kind of taking the plunge to go fully independent. As I mentioned up front at the beginning of this talk, I'm both a games developer and games educator. And in 2022, I will be going full-time on making my own games. Here's some miscellaneous bits and pieces I've made in the past to entertain you while I'm talking. I'm going to be using that independent development as an opportunity to attempt to springboard into continuing to teach others how to make their own games as well, and help burgeoning young indies take their first green steps out into the world of making games. So it's going to be a sort of a two-part deal. I'm going to be making my own games, streaming the development to some extent, and offering one-on-one private tutoring as well. If that's something that sounds interesting to you, or someone that might be interesting to, like, it'd be perfect for people who are like in high school or like getting ready for tertiary education, or just pure hobbyists, that kind of thing. Anyway, it'll all be happening like in 2020. New year, new everything. If you want to sort of like see how that goes and follow me on that journey, I've currently got some stubs of stuff on Linktree. This link here will never change, so if you want to note down the Linktree, over the course of next year, I will be, doing stuff via Twitch and Patreon and, Twitter and all that kind of stuff. So if you in any way enjoyed what you saw today or my talk from last year or whatever, and you want to see more random crap like that throughout the next year, feel free to follow me on all of those things. Anyway, hopefully we have time for questions, and I'll try and answer anything you throw at me. Awesome.
There are a lot of people in the chat wishing you well and I'm very excited to hear this news about what you're planning to do next.
Thank you.
That is really exciting and massive step. So congrats.
Yeah.
That's
Thank
fantastic. So a couple of questions from the audience. The first one, you've been described as a sorcerer, wizard, and secret meme lord.
Okay. What, just today or in general?
I'm not sure. Well, certainly today.
Okay.
Maybe in the chat you can see that. But can you confirm or deny your affiliation to those titles?
Yes. I mean, there's definitely the odd meme kicking around with my face hastily photoshopped onto it. So there's no way I could attempt to deny that. I don't know about the whole wizard thing though. Although maybe if the beard gets long enough, we'll see how that goes.
That's fair. It's it's always good to have goals.
Yeah.
Second question from Anna. Any tools that you recommend to look at and play with when doing things like this? This is referring to the Unity visualization demo.
Man. So, like, literally just anything. I know that's a really nothing answer, but, like, everything that I've kind of shown you today has kind of come from me over the years just trying to, like, stick things together that weren't intended to go together and just sort of see what happens, right? I do definitely recommend Tiled because it's like dead simple to use, and and you do just get like some handy XML out the other end of it. Something that like is kind of unrelated to anything I talked about today, but I really recommend a tiny little tool called Aseprite, Aseprite. It's like a pixel art image editor, but it's another one of those sort of like really lightweight, sort of easy to use, but extremely powerful and handy tools. So if you ever need to like aggregate a bunch of images or do a bunch of processing on images in any kind of batch way, it's really good for that. Oh no, I can't hear you. I think you're muted, Lily.
I'm totally muted. That's super embarrassing. Anyway, I hope that helps for the folks that had questions. But I was super excited to see all of that as well. I have one more question for you from Andrew, and actually I had this question myself, being somebody who's very interested in breaking computers regarding the web ingestion stuff. Would you ever be worried about sucking up arbitrary things that could be interpreted by the computer to do bad things?
Yeah, that's definitely crossed my mind with this sort of stuff. Like, when I initially conceived of this, like, wouldn't it be cool to play Res through the internet kind of game? One of my first thoughts was, oh man, you could then also just use the images from those web pages as textures in the scene as well. Immediately followed by the thought of, there's a lot of stuff on the internet you probably don't want to be shown unfiltered. So yeah, there's definitely stuff that if you wanted to turn this into like a commercial game, you'd have to do a lot of due diligence to make sure you didn't accidentally do something super illegal.
Yeah, you always got to be really careful if you're just sort of trusting the internet at large to, manipulate the program that you have. I'm also now thinking about this one game. Maybe it was a game or maybe it was a social experiment someone did where they had a plant and they hooked the plant up to a plant waterer, and people could on the internet could press the button to water the plant, and they ended up killing the plant by overwatering it. So it's just like
interesting. There was also I haven't done any research. This is off the top of my head, so I could be remembering some of the details wrong. But there was a similar thing where two universities on like opposite sides of the planet collaborated on this like art installation thing that was basically a vending machine at each university. and if you put money in and made a purchase at one of the vending machines, it would come out at the other one. And so, you as a passerby would just get, hey, a Coke just came out of the vending machine. Cool.
I love that. Buy a Coke for someone on the other side of the world.
Exactly.
Oh, that's sweet. I hope. Wait, they weren't in the same time zone, I guess. So would you wake up in the morning and go there and then just be like
It's just a pile of Cokes there. Yeah.
Yeah. Good morning. Here you go.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that's it for the questions for now.
Cool.
As always, if you have more questions for Shane, you're hanging around in the chat in the Discord for a while, aren't you?
Totally.
Yeah, brilliant. Awesome. Well, then I will give you a great big Technical Games thank you. And thank you for your amazing talk. I'm going to listen to some oscilloscope music later. And,
awesome.
I'll see you around. Thank you, Shane.
Yeah, thank you very much as well.